Yeah, well, that's pretty cool then, because Kathy, have you been to a lot of those dinners where you're sitting there and you're kind of with the whole posse?
Well, that was the first Buck Brannaman clinic that I had. Well, I'd gone to one in Colorado years ago, but it was the last afternoon of a 3-day clinic, and so and we didn't know each other at all. Um, so this was the first. He had invited my friend and I to dinner that night, and so that was the first time we'd experienced that. But
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
but
Okay.
but with our own clinics, usually you will have, the people do like to get together at night, like the people that come to the clinics and all that. And so we will usually go out to dinner
Yeah.
one of the nights. I don't know that I could do it every night, but one of the nights.
Yeah. That's something I feel like I see with at least horse clinicians. Like if you weren't careful, I could see where you could really wear yourself out, right? Because you teach all day.
Uh-huh.
And then 9 times out of 10, I don't know if vacation's the right word, but you're a part of these people's like hobby, right? So they want to go out and enjoy themselves, and I'm sure they've had fun working their dog, and they want to talk to people with the same interests and yada yada yada. But if you do that like every other weekend, right, and then
Yeah.
couple that with teaching all day for 3 days straight, you got to be careful because you get sucked into the social part of it too much, and you're just like leave completely drained on Sunday.
Yeah. 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 And for the most part, they're usually pretty good about leaving the clinic at the clinic, but sometimes they just can't help it, and so they'll be like, I just got thinking about when you said that about my dog today, or when my dog did this, or, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, and I'll go ahead and answer the question, but, it puts you back, you have to get back into clinician mode, and you're kind of trying to, like you say, take a break from it for a little bit. 'Cause the clinics are, they're fairly physical, especially if you get young dogs that are really like pretty wide open wanting to chase sheep, and you got to protect the sheep, so it can be pretty physical. But for me, it's, for you're out there from like 8 till 5, and I'm trying to always like find the best way to explain, whatever it is that comes up in a way that everybody can understand. And so, that part of it can sometimes get exhausting, to where you're just, by the end of the day, your brain's kind of just like cooked because,
Yeah.
you've spent all day explaining.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Trying to, like, again, I don't know a ton about dogs, but at least with horses, it's like trying to get what you feel in your body, have that feeling like go through your brain and like come out your mouth as something that's articulate, and like just processing that information over and over and over again. Because I imagine it's probably like when you're there at your place and you're just working dogs, you're probably at a level now you don't have to say it out like, oh, today I'm going to teach this dog this. You just kind of do it, and
yeah,
you have that feel about it.
yeah,
So
yeah,
adding that extra step, yeah, you if you do it all day, you can almost have steam coming out your ears at the end of the
yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah. And trying to explain, Jack gets criticized a bit because people will say, I don't know if they say this to him, but they say to me, well, he just didn't explain it. And I'll say, well, for Jack, it's like breathing. I said, and, can you explain to me how to breathe? He does feel he's explaining it, but it's hard for him to sometimes break it down, to the place that maybe that person needs to hear it at. And because I didn't start out like Jack did, it's easier for me to break things down because I started where a lot of people did. I'd never seen dogs work sheep. So it was all, all brand new to me. So I came into it from a different angle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Really?
I remember one time in high school, I had, can't remember what math it was, but I had a math teacher who, at one time, he like worked for the military designing submarine, like very gifted,
Hmm.
mathematically. And was a super interesting guy to talk to. And oh my gosh, one of the like worst math teachers you could ever have in your life, because like it just all made sense to him, right? Like it
Uh-huh.
was all intuitive to him.
Yeah.
And then, I can remember some of the best math teachers I ever had growing up were ones that were like, yeah, I was pretty much a C student all the time. Like I didn't even like math, but I had to work at it really hard and, figure it out that way. And,
Uh-huh.
so people, I think that's with a lot of things, not that they can't get good at teaching, but if you're just really talented at something, or like you said, kind of grow up with that and it's just inherent in you,
Yeah.
it can be harder to explain it in
Yes.
layman's terms.
Yeah.
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 What also seems like there's different kinds of teachers. Some people have a lot of information and they can dispense it, but then there's the teachers who, it's not that some don't care, but there's some teachers that really care that you get it. So it's almost like you pursue training to a higher level all the time. They're pursuing teaching at a higher level all the time, and they're constantly pursuing different ways of communicating that information to you. So,
Yeah.
year by year, you'll just see them change and you'll see their teaching style change.
Yeah.
And you still have the odd person, right, who wants a question to be answered in the way that they see it in their mind. They almost already have the answer and they just want the teacher to say it. So they'll keep
Yes.
asking it over and over and over again and
Yeah.
kind of feeding their little preamp in there, trying to get the answer they want. And they're just not
Yeah.
going to get it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like when I first started, when I first started in this, after Jack and I got married, I went to all of his clinics, and he drove, we lived in Virginia at the time, and he didn't like schedule his clinics out wisely. He just like, so we'd drive to the West Coast, and then we'd drive back to the Midwest, and then we'd go back up like to Washington, and then we go back over to the East Coast. I mean, so we spent a lot of time in the vehicle. But I would go to all those clinics and I would just sit and watch. Very seldom. I sometimes participated. He sometimes would say to me, go get your dog. I want you to show him whatever. But I sat and I spectated and watched. And I for weekend after weekend after weekend. And I feel like I learned so much just sitting there watching. I learned probably about all of it, about teaching and about people and about the dogs. It was just, you get people where they, like with the dog clinics, people bring, you might have 10, 15 dogs at a clinic, and they come in individually. And so you work with each one twice a day, and they get some people, not everybody, but some people get very caught up in if it's 10 minutes, they got to have their 10 minutes working that dog. And I'll say at the start of the clinic, this is a clinic. You're going to gain more probably from watching everybody else than maybe your own turn, because you might be nervous, or whatever to start with. Take in each one. You will learn so much if you take in each dog that comes in here and really study.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, that's a good observation, because as you learn and get better, you start to know what to look for. You know what the objective is. And obviously people have to get in the clinic. They have to get a time and a slot and show up. But
yes. Yeah.
you see that the same with the horse clinics, where people will sign up for a clinic and then if they can't ride, they'll find someone to ride their horse. And like there's people who think their horse was going to get something out of the clinic. And not that their horse
Uh-huh.
doesn't, but they make sure they get that time. And they're like, well, my horse is now, whatever it is, I don't know, about 9 hours better.
Yeah.
Because somebody I hired rode my horse in the clinic, where they kind of
Uh-huh.
missed the point that it was for them. And
Yeah.
even if they couldn't ride, they should have been there and been watching. Just like you
Yes.
said, they're
Yeah.
missing we talked about that with someone recently who starts a lot of performance cults. And he was saying the same thing, how when you're structuring your day and you're trying to get everything ridden, it's less about an hour on this horse, an hour on that horse, and an hour with this other horse, but it's more about a change. It might be a 10-minute project or it might be an hour and a half, but that you're making some progress and then you're moving on to the next horse. And it probably the same with your clinic. There's probably people that would come with their dog and would be better off just watching the whole time, not even getting their dog out, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's actually why I chose to spectate Buck's clinic, because I know myself well enough, even though I'm a clinician. The horses, I've always had a love for horses. I've always had a horse, but it's kind of out of my element, and so I was like, I know myself too well. I would get too muddled in my head and I'd make silly mistakes, and I wouldn't be able to actually take in what he was saying. And so just going and watching and sitting there for 3 days, it was amazing, just listening to him. And the parallels between the horses and the dogs, that was the other thing that I just kept saying to my friend, it's exactly the same in the dogs. It is exactly the same. It's the method is just, it's just the same. I mean, freedom to make their mistakes so they can learn from it is the thing with the dogs.
Hey there, On the Move listener. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to stop and listen to our podcast. Whether you're a faithful listener or a first-time listener that likes what you hear, if you want to support us, there's a couple things you can do. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, like our videos on YouTube, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can follow us and leave us reviews. Whatever medium you're listening on, if you can engage with the podcast on there by following, leaving positive reviews, and just generally helping spread the word about On the Move, it's a big help to us, and it helps us grow and bring you better episodes every week. Again, thanks for your support, and we'll see you guys.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you say that. I've had some clients in the past that have ridden their horses, and over the course of the time, you'll say, "Hey, you ought to ride in a buck clinic," and they always kind of shy away from that. And then eventually they say, "Well, to be honest, I'm just too afraid. I think I would cry, or I think I'd break down." And that's why I have you working with the horse, so it'll be good enough so I can go ride in the clinic. And I always say, "No, just go do it. Like, it's not a big deal." But back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. Yeah, like Buck has it down to such a science. There is a certain amount of intimidation, I would say, if you go to ride in a Buck Brannaman clinic. It's sort of like a Broadway show almost. He's the first horse clinic I ever went to, and coming into it through that avenue, I thought everybody did it like that, and I didn't realize for a long time that there was no production crew or some like manager that ran his deal. Right? It's just him and the guys that work for him, but he's done such a good job. And of course, me coming into this style of horsemanship, long after he's already been doing it for so long, he just has such a routine down. And like you said, all the information, he has a very repeatable system. Do you find with your clinics that you have to, I'm interested about you can set the tone in many different ways, and how much effort do you put into making the tone of your clinic the way you want it to?
Well, I give a little talk at the start of it, and I basically I try to explain the method quickly, which it's the longer that people get into this, the seems like the common theme is, this is so complex. This is so much more complex than I thought it was going to be. I thought it, I think people see somebody work a dog that's actually, maybe they're quite good, and they make it look easy, just like anybody doing anything. If you're really good at it, you can make it look easy. And they think, well, I can do that. And then they get into it and they're like, I had no idea this was as complicated as it is. and so I try to explain the method, and give kind of a rundown of the method. And then I will say, So, I'm here to help you, but again, you've got to watch each dog. To get the most out of this clinic, you have to watch each dog. And I understand if we move off over into the field and you can't hear what we're saying, you can sometimes lose interest a little bit because you don't know what's going on. But when I come back to explain, what we worked on and what I told the person, sometimes I'm mic'd up and sometimes I'm not. So if I'm not mic'd up, I go back over and I explain to everybody what went on in the field. If you're talking and you don't stop talking when I come back to explain and you miss what I said and you say, well, sorry, I didn't hear what you said, I'm going to have to say, well, sorry. I'm not going to repeat it again because it's just waste everybody time. We're here on a schedule. So I try to set it that way so that people realize, oh, well, when she comes back over here to explain, we better be paying attention, and, I'll try to say to everybody, questions make a clinic. Please don't be afraid to ask questions. And to begin with, if it's a new clinic, sometimes people are hesitant, but as soon as one person starts, then usually then it snowballs, and usually sometimes the best questions are the one where they'll say, well, I feel like this is probably a really dumb question, and I'll say back, well, this is probably going to be the best question of the clinic. Because sometimes it's a thing where I didn't think about it that way, and I didn't think to break that piece down and explain it. And so when someone asks me that question, I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I suppose that isn't just clear. That is something that I need to explain. So.
Yeah. No, that makes sense that you would do that, because I don't know about you, Joe. I know I've been in a couple smaller horse clinics where things were starting to scatter and people weren't paying attention. And it's not our sandbox. We're just there. We're participants. If the ship goes down, we're sinking too, or you can pack up and leave. But you almost want to tell all the other participants, like, hey guys, pay attention.
Yeah.
We're learning from this guy. And you feel so bad for a teacher when their class starts to scatter. But I mean, at the end of the day, it probably is the teacher's fault that would happen. But I was curious about that because I don't know the setting for a dog clinic, but I know in a horse clinic, you have a lot of folks the other people, depending on whose clinic you go to, but if you go to a buck clinic, there's a lot of people and you're all working on something together at the same time, but there's definitely room to go sit in the corner for a little while till he spots you. But in a lot of other people's clinics, they'll work with one person at a time. And so there's plenty of downtime to get distracted. So in your clinics, if somebody's waiting, when you work with one dog at a time, everyone else, do they keep their dog with them, or do they have to take it back to a kennel or something?
It depends. If the dog is quiet, they can keep it there with them. So we work in different areas. So we require a round pen. It's like a 70-foot in diameter, like with the horses. For the very started dogs, for the very pups, if you get a pup coming in that's first time on sheep, the round pen itself is going to be the control, because our method, you don't use, that we don't have leashes on them. We just let them go. They have the freedom to make choices. Sometimes, the sheep, you are going to you got to protect the sheep. The sheep are the main thing. And so, if everybody's standing around the round pen with their dogs, and the round pen can get pretty exciting, as you can imagine, because you get a young dog in there and there's a lot of chasing, and, sometimes I have to do a bit of yelling and correcting to get this pup to actually hear me. And, so it can get pretty exciting. Well, if the dogs on the outside all start barking and carrying on, it just turns into chaos. And so a lot of times people will just leave their dogs back if there's going to be quite a few round pen dogs, because it is the action is always going, and it does excite the dogs. When we move out to the field, that action's a lot quieter. It's just, the sheep are moving, but not in the same way, and it's not right there in front of all the dogs. So those same dogs that maybe got so excited that they couldn't sit at a round pen, they could probably sit there at the field, and then they don't have to keep going back to get their dog. So it really depends on the dog.
That makes sense.
Joe, that excitement reminds me of Jack's story about the dog and the chain.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah. He was like, this dog would just as soon kill a sheep as look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that story.
Yeah. Yeah, you get a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, so I'll tell you something that really interests me, is kind of the dynamic that you have with Jack now, where you guys kind of alternate clinics, and you guys are kind of doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like he'll go do a clinic and then you'll go do a clinic. My first question is, I think it's very unique the way you talk about how you were, because initially you were kind of working for him, like helping him, didn't have a ton of experience, and then he mentioned he kind of saw you had a knack for it and you started learning to work the dog some.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I've seen, at least in the horse world, not everyone can go from the mentor-mentee relationship to a being married relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's cool, like even today, to hear you say, yeah, we went around to these clinics and I got to sit and watch him and learn and all this stuff. But then obviously, that's one part of your relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it, honestly, I don't know you guys that well, but I've seen that fall apart a lot. So the fact that you guys have been able to make it work, I think speaks volumes to both your dispositions.
No, well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It definitely, is trying.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, we just figured out a way to make it work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, when I was growing up, at least with riding lessons, that I always heard, you can't take advice from someone who's directly related to you.
Uh-huh.
Like, people, even, as someone who like had a mom that was a riding instructor, she was like, no, we need to find like other people to go teach you.
Uh-huh.
If there's something really going on, I might like mention something to you, but we're too much mom and son, so taking all this direct advice or all this direction from me, that's going to drive you nuts eventually. So we're just not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, so I did learn, the majority from Jack. But when we lived in Virginia, there was actually a friend of his that he knew in Scotland moved to Gordonsville, Virginia, just outside of Charlottesville. And so we were at each other's places every weekend. I mean, they were either at our place or we were at their place. And Tom's still in the dogs and runs. In fact, he just won a huge competition out in Meeker, Colorado this last year. So to your point, I mean, when we'd get together, I would go work with Tom and Jack would work with Tom's wife, Florence, because she was running dogs at that point too. And so I didn't ask Tom a ton. I mean, I just watched him. I watched how he was with his dogs. I watched how he had a way of communicating without commanding a ton. And I just liked that feel. And I just always remembered watching that thinking, that's what I want. I want to have a communication with my dog, the dog, the sheep, myself, the way that Tom makes that look. It looks seamless. And so Jack and Tom are very similar, but they're also different. Jack, to me, is more hands-on handler when he was competing. He's going to whistle and command his dog quicker than like Tom does. Tom kind of waits. There's times where Tom, you're like, okay, Tom, you're going to miss that gate if you don't command your dog, kind of thing. He almost leans to the side of he waits too long, but I feel like what I did was I kind of meshed the two. Of course I had to make it work for me. I mean, I learned from Jack, but I couldn't be Jack. And I learned a lot from Tommy, but I'm not going to be Tom. I got to make it work for me, so my timing and all that had to get better through myself, not me thinking about, okay, so Jack would have done this here or Tom would have done that there. I had to just start getting that timing myself. It's funny because people, you don't hear it so much anymore, but for a while there, people would try to put a Scottish brogue on and sound Scottish when they talk to their dogs. And I would just be like, that is not going to be the answer. You can't just, it has everything to do with timing and reading the sheep. But they just thought, well, maybe if they sounded Scottish, it would help.
Right.
That's really funny. That's like the people that try to sound like Ray Hunt when they're working with their horse, They're like, this way, that way. Get them hindquarters, and it's all this jargon.
Yeah.
But how did you get involved with dogs as your passion? Was that through Jack, or were you already doing that before you met him?
I knew I wanted to work with animals. I actually worked on a horse ranch, which it was. It was a hodgepodge. So they had a quarter horse stallion, they had a Morgan stallion, they had a Shetland pony stallion, and they had a miniature horse stallion. And they bred everything under the sun to those horses. And so it was, I learned a lot, but it was a bit of a mess. So as you can imagine, they went out of business. And
we have a saying, there's breeders and there's multipliers, and that kind of sounds like a multiplying outfit.
Yeah, it was. On one hand, I loved it because I had horses all around me, and and I was young and dumb, I guess, and they would say, "Hey, could you go ride that?" And I would be sure, and I just go jump on this horse. But so I felt like I got a lot of experience, but at the same time, I was like, I don't see how this can last, and so then I worked just for my mom and dad on the farm, until my brother said to me one day, we always called him the Scotsman that lived up the road. He said, the Scotsman that lives up the road with the border collies, he's looking for somebody to just take care of his dogs. My brother had been doing it and he had to stop. And I said, sure. I love dogs. I had a German Shepherd that I had in obedience, and I really thought that, we were going to set the world on fire. I was in AKC obedience, and I'd gotten a title on her, and I was training her for the next title. And so when I went for the interview, Jack said to me, have you ever seen a border collie work? And I said, no. And so he showed me, he took a dog and sent it out for these sheep, and I was just flabbergasted. I was like, oh my God, I'd never seen such a thing. And I immediately lost interest in the obedience. I kept my dog. I kept my German Shepherd till she died, but I did no more of the obedience. I was sitting there thinking, here, I've got this dog on a leash, and he's controlling that dog at 400, 500, 600 yards with just these little whistles, and very quietly and commanding all of that. It just was amazing to me to see that. And so I started out just taking care of his dogs and taking care of the sheep. And then he asked me if I wanted to learn how to train.
Hey guys, let's talk about steel buildings for a minute. Maybe you've looked into making one, building one on your place. Maybe you saw the price tag and that scared you off. Maybe just the sheer amount of work and effort, planning, all that good stuff that goes into it has kept you from going ahead and building on your property. Well, now's a great time to get a free quote from a great company. Head over to www.metalmdi.com/on the move. And our friends at Metal Material Direct have a free online configurator. You can plug in all your details, dimensions, specifications, colors, windows, dormers, all kind of cool stuff. And you can see the building and get a free quote. If you head over there now and tell them that the guys from On the Move sent you, you can get a massive discount on your building. And we're talking American steel. This is top quality stuff, guys, and a great company. They also offer fencing, a really cool fencing solution. It's a octagon pipe with bolt together connectors. So don't miss out on this. If you have wanted to build, need a building, or building fence, building an arena, just anything ranch, farm, or commercial related, head on over to www.metalmdi.com/on the move and tell them that the guys from On the Move sent you.
And he had this young dog that was, he had her started, but she was very easy, what we call easy. Like she just was a natural. And so he said, just move around and just watch her and just see where if you move one way, see what she does and just get the feel of that. And once you get the feel of that, then we can add more structure to it. And so that's what I did. I just, and of course I'm like everybody else when they first work a dog, when you get caught up in this, I think if I remember right, I said a way to me to her and she went around the sheep and I was like, oh my God, look at that. She's bringing me sheep and she's, it just kind of caught you that way, and then I got a puppy from Jack. It was one, actually, he didn't like him. He had me start taking him home with me because he said his nature was wrong. He needed a little more one-on-one. Well, of course, when I started taking him home with me and everything, well, then I completely fell in love with him. And so on my birthday, Jack handed me $100 and said, here's a bonus, since it's your birthday, here's a bonus for work. And I handed it back and I said, no, I want this to be a down payment on Scott. And he said, no. He said, if you want a dog, you're going to get a good dog. You're not going to have that. And I said, no, I want Scott, and so we argued back and forth. And then he's like, well, that's fine, but I'm just telling you, you'll never get anywhere with him. His nature's all wrong. And I said, well, it's for me to find out. And so I started him and he was very grippy. When I say grippy, he that's the term for biting the sheep. And a bit of bloodletting went on. Lots of wool pulling and
I apologize to interrupt you, but when he says the nature is off, did Jack know, could he tell he was just going to be that kind of type of dog just from how he behaved as a puppy?
Not the gripping. When he said his nature was wrong, Scout was very shy. So he was an only pup, the only pup in the litter. And sometimes that can make them, they don't have the litter mates to kind of help them, come out of their shell, so to speak. Not always. Sometimes an only pup is fine, but he was an only pup and he just was if Jack spoke, he would go hide. He just was very, very timid. And that's why I started taking him home and exposing him to more stuff. And so he thought it wasn't really the gripping and all of that. He just thought the dog's nature wouldn't handle the training. He's never going to take a correction. He's never going to, if a sheep looks at him wrong, he's going to turn and run kind of thing.
Right.
And, but I just said, no, I want to try him. I want to see what I can do with him. And I wouldn't let Jack work him because, I just thought, well, everybody's going to say Jack trained him and I don't want that. And they're still going to say it anyway, but I will know that I trained this dog myself. Now, he probably would have gone further faster with Jack, but I learned a ton, and Jack would come out sometimes and watch me and say, no, don't do that. You're putting too much pressure on him there. Or he might say, you need to correct him harder for that, but then back off of him. And Scott just got, the sheep brought the confidence out in him. And so there was one time Jack was watching out the window, and he came out to actually come up to the round pen to watch me. And as soon as he came to the side of the pen, Scott just started diving and gripping. And so then Jack backed off, and he kind of, up in Wisconsin, there's a ton of trees. So he hid behind a tree. And as soon as he went behind that tree and got out of sight, Scott started working really nice again. And so he came out from behind the tree and he said, okay, we got to build his confidence with me standing here. And so he stood there on the outside of the round pen, and I just kept working him until he could go between Jack standing there and the sheep and not grip and he just slowly started to gain confidence, more and more and more confidence all the time. And so I trained him. I started running him in novice and then moved him into open, I think the second or third year that we competed, and he won the first open trial he went to. And the man who owned the sheep came to me after, and he said, that's just how I like to see my sheep handled. And that was the biggest compliment to me. I was like, well, that's better than winning the trial, was him saying that, and so Scott actually became one of the better breeders in the kennel, and Jack did not want to breed him. He was like, nope, that nature, I know he's a lot better, but his nature's wrong and all that. And I was like, we'll just try it one time. And if they're no good, then we won't breed him again. Well, my second dog was Scott's daughter, Jess, and Jack did everything he could to try to get her from me. He just absolutely loved that dog. He was like, he pulled out all the stops. He's like, well, she'll never go as far. She'll go further with me faster. And I'm like, well, he's just going to have to go slow with me because I'm keeping her. And so she was the second dog that I trained up to a pretty high competitive level. I believe she was third in the national finals one year, third or fifth. And Jack then did say, you know what, I was wrong. It wasn't his nature. It was his confidence. And there's a big difference. If it's truly that it's their nature, that is really hard to change. But if it's their confidence, depending on how you handle it, you can completely change it. So,
Jack did mention that you all differ a little in your training style, but he failed to mention that you're really just a lot better than he is.
Yeah, no.
He kind of left that part out.
Yeah. No, we actually don't really train that much different. It's the same method. We just go about it slightly different. Again, I had to do it how it works for me. And so it's the same exact thought process. It's just, we just do it. I had a friend here the other day, and she was watching me work one of my young dogs, and she's at a stage right now where I'm trying to get her to drive. And driving is hard for border collies because it's against their natural instinct. Their natural instinct is to gather. And so to get them to push things away from you, depending on the dog, they can sometimes struggle with it. And so I was showing my friend, I'm like, see, she's starting to get it, but you can just see she's still trying to slide around to the head all the time and bring them back to me. And she said, I was here not too long ago and I saw Jack work his dogs. And she's like, you definitely don't have as much on your dogs at the same stage that he does on his. And I said, I know, that's just where we're different. I might err more on the side of, I wait for a while before I start putting a lot of commands to things. I do like to let a lot of more, not that Jack's dogs aren't natural, they're very natural. He just puts more commands on them quicker than I do. I feel like we end up with the same product, same end result in our training. We just go about it slightly differently. But our dogs are pretty, I feel like I could go grab a dog out of his kennel and I could work it like it was mine, and I think he could do the same with any of mine. My dogs would understand why he's correcting them, where he's correcting them, and his dogs would understand the same with me.
Mm-hmm.
That I think that is kind of a testament to your self-identity and your confidence in yourself, that you had the perspective of I've got to do what works for me. Because at least in the horse deal and lots of other things that I've pursued in life, you can see people, they start learning from someone and they start getting better, but they're like, I need to be a carbon copy of this person.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately to their own detriment, because you will never reach your full potential, because, for example, you can't be Jack Knox, but you can be the best Kathy
Right.
that you can possibly be.
Yeah.
And so it's obviously been very good. You've had that perspective, but I know even for me personally, there have been times where I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna try to be exactly like that person, and then you keep working, and then something falls flat on your face because you're like, oh wait, I'm me, and
Yeah.
then you're kind of stuck with the decision, like, well, am I gonna be me, or am I gonna like be me trying to be that other person?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and really that Scott dog, my first dog, he probably taught me that better than any person could have, because he was not, it was interesting because most handlers that saw him run at trials, he wasn't flashy enough. He wasn't like sliding to a stop on 3 legs, he was very methodical in what he did. He was very quiet. He was very calm. I used to joke that, you could send him on an outrun and go get a cup of coffee, and you come back out and he'd probably be at the end of his outrun, because he just was very quiet and slow. But any farmer or rancher who saw that dog, they would always come find me and they'd say, would you sell that dog? And I'm like, no, he's not for sale. But I think it was because they saw how the stock reacted to him. They saw that him being so quiet and taking that little extra time, just settled the sheep or the cattle, whatever he was working, and so Scott kind of taught me that, that take more time. You will save time by taking time with livestock. And I mean, he also showed me that, because there'd be times I'd be like, come on, Scott, and I'd really cry him, really try to get him to come on forcefully, and he would, and then everything would scatter and he'd have to regather it all, and I'd be like, oh, whoops, okay.
yeah,
I'll just let you do it quietly like you were doing it.
yeah,
And we'll get it done.
he's looking at you like, man, that was a good idea, human.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I of course I learned from Jack, and I learned from Tommy, and I learned from, I was fortunate enough, we went to Scotland every March. They have the nursery final. It's for young dogs, and so we would go over for 2-3 weeks, sometimes every March, and go to that. And I met a lot of the dog. It was mainly dog men at that time. Met a lot of the top dog men. Sat in their homes, listened to their stories, watched them work their dogs. It's all learning experiences. That's awesome.
All right, so I'm still interested though. So how did you end up getting married to Jack?
So I went to work for him, and well, I guess it just evolved from it.
Did it take a while for you guys to realize that you were meant for each other, or was it kind of right off the bat? Because it seems like you had quite a working relationship there for a little while.
Yeah, I think I worked for him for 2 years before we got married. Mm-hmm. So we moved to Virginia in '84, I think it was, and that was the year that we got married. So,
did he give you a dog for an engagement present or anything like that? Did he do anything Scottish that was kind of something you weren't used to? Because he was a foreigner in a way, right?
No.
So there must have been some novelty to Jack.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to spill all the details on the podcast, but if you have any little interesting stories for us, though, we'll gobble them up.
Well, sometimes it's pretty funny with both he and Tommy, because of course we do tease them that they are foreigners. And, Jack will get frustrated sometimes and he'll hang up the phone. Especially when it used to be the landlines, not so much the cell phones now, but like the landlines, he would kind of like slam the receiver down and say, "Oh, that bloody foreigner." And I'm like, really? But, yeah. And drive-throughs are interesting with him because nobody understands him, which I just still find. I'm like, I can understand. I don't even hear his accent anymore, but the drive-through people apparently struggle, and they he's always like, ugh, be easier just to go in and order and point.
Hey, the drive-through people struggle with me. I think they struggle with a lot of people because there's a certain type of person that works at the drive-through, and it just doesn't. There is a disconnect, and it's not electronics. There's a cultural disconnect a lot of times between the person working the drive-through and the person going through the drive-through, and so it's gonna happen. But no, he was great on the podcast. He has a great voice. Out of all the foreign accents, I really love the Scottish act. Well,
yeah,
that and Australian. I'm a little torn. You get a good Australian accent, but a good Scottish accent. There's nothing like it. I mean, that's so cool.
Yeah, I do hear it with him if he's gone back to Scotland or if he's been on the phone with somebody from Scotland. I can always I hear it more then, but other than that, I don't really hear it anymore. But like Tommy, because I don't see Tom all the time, I hear his. But Florence probably would say the same. She probably doesn't hear it anymore either. That his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah.
So I noticed when you were talking about when you guys would go and work with Tommy and Florence, you said you didn't necessarily ask him a lot of questions, but you would just watch him a lot.
uh-huh.
And that was kind of a similar story Jack told when he was talking about watching some of his early mentors when he was young and up and coming in Scotland. He said, "Yeah, I had these guys that I didn't necessarily talk to them a bunch, but I'd always make sure I watched them and I watched them work their dogs."
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like a theme, and it did occur to me, most good horsemen, they're pretty observant, and you can like watch someone ride and say, okay, this is kind of what they've got going, and this is what's good and bad and yada yada yada. But with working a dog, I feel like the folks that get really good at that, it's almost like another level of observation, because not that I want to try to get on a horse and ride around with my eyes closed, but you're physically sitting on the horse, so there's that feel and that touch. And even if someone has a really keen eye, if the person riding the horse has a lot of feel, they're still not going to see like the whole conversation between the rider and the horse.
Yeah.
Whereas, working that dog, I understand there's a feel and that there's like an energy exchange, right? But you're taking away a sense, basically. You're not, all you can do is see them and talk to them. You're not like physically touching the dog when they're working the sheep. So is that something that if you're going to be really good with dogs and livestock, does someone have to really work to develop that? Or I guess you could have it naturally, but it seems to me like even more so than sitting on a horse, you have to really be able to watch a situation and see every little detail if you're going to be good at this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing that, that I try to teach at my clinics is it's stock sense. I mean, you've got to be able to read the stock, to be able to command your dog. And yes, the dogs are natural, but they still have to be trained. So 60-70% is natural instinct, but it has to be shaped and it has to be trained. Well, if you take the sheep out of the picture, and I'm just going to keep saying sheep, you could do it with cattle, ducks, whatever, but we train on sheep, so I'm just going to say on sheep. If you take the sheep out of the picture, which unfortunately a lot of methods do, they force a dog out. They stand in the sheep and they force the dog off the sheep. You're missing such a huge part of the dogs and understanding the dogs. So, like people used to call me and sometimes still will say, hey, I've got this dog doing such and such. And my first question back to them is, well, what were your sheep doing? And they can't tell me. And I'm like, well, I can give you a bunch of scenarios as to why I think your dog might be doing this. But if you could tell me what your sheep were doing at the time, I'd have a much better idea of what your dog is possibly thinking, in that position. Which way are the sheep leaning? Where are they running to? Where are the, all of that. That's going to give me a lot of information that I can hopefully help you with your dog. So at my clinics, I do a lot. I try to really stress, okay, you got to read the sheep here. You got to watch the sheep here. Look at what your sheep are doing, so a lot of times they're so caught up in just watching their dog that they're missing their timing is way off. There's no way your timing can be right if you're only watching your dog. You have to watch the stock. And so for me, that's the biggest piece to try to get people to understand, is respecting the stock. I mean, respect. If it wasn't for the sheep, we wouldn't have border collies. It's not a chicken or egg thing. The sheep for sure came first. The border collie came second, and it was the shepherds that developed the dogs. So when people just disregard or disrespect the sheep, I just always feel like, you're going to be really hard for me to help because you've got to respect the very reason that we have these dogs, and try to learn more about them, and people will say, well, sheep are stupid. And I really struggle when that's what someone leads with me. It takes a while for me to then, I have to reprogram my brain and say, okay, now I have to educate them on how sheep aren't stupid. But
okay, I've heard you say that before. Could you give me? So I grew up with sheep, and I don't want to offend you, but I've been around, I feel like, a lot of livestock, and if I had to put money down on the intelligence of different species, I don't think I'd bet on sheep. So that being said, I don't want to be that person that thinks sheep are stupid. So could you maybe give me your 2 cents on why you don't think sheep are stupid? I don't think they're stupid, but I do think they maybe don't have as much self-preservation as maybe cattle or horses do, or that's what it appears to a layman like me. So please, can you educate me on that? Because when you said that, I was like, I kind of grew up saying sheep my whole life, so I'm not going to say that to her, but I did have that thought.
I think that people think that because they always try to force sheep because sheep are smaller and you think you can force them. So when they're trying to force them, they stop the sheep thinking. They put them in panic. The sheep are now in panic stations, not in thinking mode. And so they'll say, well, it ran right into the fence right next to a wide open gate. Well, it ran into the fence because it's not seeing right now because you've got it so upset that it can't see that wide open gate. If you would have just, most of the time what's happening at the clinics is the dogs are way too tight. The dogs are just in the pressure point the whole time. Never give the sheep a chance to look and see where they want those sheep to go. They never give them a chance to think. So, I mean, to me, what does think when it's panicking, right. and so I do feel that usually sheep are being forced. They're being manhandled because they're smaller and you can potentially do that. But if you give them a chance to look and see what you want them to do and take a step back when they're trying to figure it out, rather than usually what most people do is when they see the sheep even thinking about going out the gate, they start putting a ton of pressure on them instead of just taking that step back, giving them that chance to look and make sure that they can, have some self-preservation. They don't have a ton of defenses because they're not big enough. I mean, they try, but like we have a big coyote problem. We during lambing, we even though we've got guard dogs and everything, coyotes they would wipe us out if we didn't have the guard dogs. I think the guard dogs keep it to a minimum, but we still lose to coyotes. And so, I pasture lamb, and so I'm moving sheep all the time, and a lot of times I'll have my dogs, but I don't let a dog, especially when that lamb is really small and that use defense is high, I don't let my dogs beat those sheep then. I step in and I move everything because I want my sheep to know that they can still defend. I don't want to take that piece away from them. So if they will try to defend that lamb from a coyote, I want that piece left intact. So I give them the respect to know that they can do that. So, I mean, I get that sheep can be frustrating, but I think that, like, if I didn't have dogs, I don't know that I would want sheep.
Sure.
It's the dogs that make the sheep easy.
Right. Would it be fair to say, and that makes sense what you're saying because of the size, kind of what I am hearing then is maybe they, in terms of how a flock would handle compared to maybe like a herd of cows, it's almost like it's easier to put pressure on them. So keeping them in that thinking mode and not in that flight mode is a little more delicate.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Is that kind of what you'd say? Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense. And I would buy that they maybe because of their size and their lack of defenses and just kind of what they are biologically, even though they have the ability to think, it would be a lot easier for someone without feel to flip them into kind of a flight panic mode.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I mean, different breeds of horses are like that. So I get that totally, I feel like.
And the different breeds of sheep are different too. Like we have North Country Cheviots, and to me they are highly intelligent. And they're also very reactive, which is why I like them, because their reactiveness pulls out everything that I want in my dogs. So they actually, to me, they help us with our breeding program because they're going to show me, is my dog on the proper balance? Does he have enough power? The North Country Cheviots to me are always trying to find a way to outmaneuver. But yet they respect the dogs and they yield. So they're not impossible, but they're definitely always tricky. They're always challenging in different ways.
Hey, On the Move listener. Have you been following us on social media? Have you been watching the video format of the podcasts? If so, you've probably noticed by now that we have On the Move merch. I'm wearing one of our hats right now. The first order of hats we did flew off the shelves, and we've only got a handful left in each style. But we're doing another order, and if you want to pre-order your On the Move hat today, go to www.onthemovepodcast.com. There you'll find our Shopify store with hats, mugs, stickers, and other merch. Get it just in time for the holiday season and let everyone know that you're on the move. Yeah. Well, what you were saying earlier, about people not watching the sheep, just listening to you talk there and Jack, when he talked, he'd always describe the dog as a tool and not, I feel like that's a perspective. If you have a dog, and this is what you do dog trials on the weekends, you don't like, no, it's not a tool. Like that's the boat I take out on the lake every weekend, right? So I'm watching the boat that I bought. Go out there and work the sheep. Whereas if you think of them as a tool, it's like, no, I've got to do a job, and the border collie is the best thing to do the job with. And then you're kind of more focused on the sheep. And like you're talking about, like just thinking about how the sheep handle and stuff like that. I think it's the same way with people who are maybe like with horses and cattle kind of weekend warriors. They're like, well, I'll just do whatever I want to do. That's going to be best for my horse. And then you watch all that go down, and I'm like, God, man, that poor, herd of cows is just kind of taking it on the chin because this person wanted to work on whatever today.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a healthy perspective when he kept referring to the dog as a tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's, that's what they were bred to be, and they have been morphed into a lot of different things now. Border collies, they use them in agility, they use them for a ton of things because they are so smart. But the bottom line is, and I do say this at clinics, and I think I turn some people off when I say this, because a lot of the people that come to the clinics, their dog is almost their kid, and they have them in the house, which is fine. I mean, we don't have our dogs in the house. That doesn't mean that you can't have your dog in the house. But for me, if it's in the house, does he have manners? And is he respectful? That would be the thing. You can have him in the house all day long as he's respectful and has manners. We don't have ours in because, well, number one, they are working dogs. And so they are a lot of times a mess. And we have a lot of them. So there's no way we could have all the dogs in the house. But if we did bring one in, I feel like they would come out of that kennel and come into this house and be just as respectful as they are when they're on the sheep. They would probably come in, lay down, and that would be the end of it. There's just a lot of different things comes into that, and so when I say at clinics, you're not going to like it when I say this, but these dogs were bred to be a work tool. They were not bred to live in a house. They were bred to work. The shepherds would get out and grab them out of the kennel or the barn in the morning. They'd work all day long and they'd go back in that barn at night. And that was day in and day out. That's what they did. They weren't, bred to be taken to, everywhere, exposed to all of, all the stimuli that sometimes can drive some border collies over the top. It's too much. We have our kennels set up in a very specific manner, and I think some people would come in here and think that we're being mean to the dogs. And actually all we're trying to do is kind of save them from themselves. So they're set up where they don't see each other so that they can't fence race. They can just see right in front of them. They don't see livestock because they're in buildings, but they also get out. They get walked 3 times a day. They get worked on top of that. So they're out a lot. They're just, when it's time for them to be kenneled, they're kenneled. And like a horse going into a stall, they're in individual stalls. And I just think it helps their minds.
Yeah. I mean, that all kind of plays into the general anthropomorphization that people put on lots of animals. Like that guy picked up a horse here the other day, and he was trailering it up to North Georgia, and it's only, 3.5 hours away. And so we were talking about the transport a little bit. And, this guy's had horses for years, but I could tell he was kind of like telling me what he was going to do, but kind of bouncing the idea off me almost. And a lot of his theories, I kind of shot holes in them, and same with like being on the trailer. He wanted to get him off the trailer and do these different things. And I was like, hey, that horse has stood, tied to a hitching post for 8 or 9 hours before. I mean, him standing on your trailer for 4 hours is nothing. and he's
Yeah.
going down the road, and you have a hay bag in there. You know, he's living a great life. You're sitting in the truck, you're not going anywhere. And after I said that, he was like, "Oh yeah, I never thought about that." But
Uh-huh.
just automatically he figured, you know, horse standing in trailer must be uncomfortable. We should
Yeah.
stop and walk him a little bit on the way. And it's just that it's that tool thing. Like that horse is a tool.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he's quiet and peaceful because he's had a good life. He works hard. He can be tied and stand somewhere for a while. You know, you buy him and take him, load him on there. He'll be fine. He can ride all the way home. You know, it's
Yeah.
your new tool. But they think of it like a new member to the family. You know, we should be nice to him on the way home, and we should make sure
Yeah.
he knows we appreciate him and all that. But I imagine
Uh-huh.
that's a constant
Yeah.
thing. You probably struggle with that more than someone who teaches horsemanship, just because the dog, you know, the dog is man's best friend. That's kind of the classic
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of your students are pretty devoted, you know, to what you're doing, and they probably understand your principles pretty well. But I'm sure it's still hard for some of them to treat their dog like a tool and not kind of, you know, do things that the dog doesn't care about anyway, but they do it for themselves just so
Yeah.
that they feel like they're giving him this better experience.
Yeah.
You know, like some of those dog movies don't help anything. Like there was a
Yeah.
dog. It was a cool movie too. That dog, the dog movie called Racing in the Rain, I think. Did you see that about the
Huh.
golden retriever in Italy? And it was a
No.
great movie, but at the same time, you're like, this is terrible because there's going to be a bunch of people out there that think their dog is a well, in that movie, I think the dog was a reincarnated Mongolian or something.
Oh.
And
Oh.
you know, so it's like this dog has a life, and he's watching life go by, and it was like putting meaning to all the things that dogs do and why they help out, and
Yeah.
really, it's not that at
Yeah.
all. It's like
Yeah.
you were saying earlier. You know, you're trying to teach people how to communicate. And, you
Yeah.
know, maybe with dogs, it's easy for people to think it's their best friend, or it's a person, just looks like a dog. Whereas with cattle, it's sometimes the opposite. Rather than someone trying to communicate with the cows, they see it as like a show of brute force. Like, let's go
Uh-huh.
out there and let's hold the ranks, fellas, and let's win the day and beat these cows. And across the board, like the common theme is learning to communicate with the animals. You know, you learn to lead, but you learn to communicate with them mostly
Yeah.
through feel. And that kind of leads to another question I had for you. And that is, and I don't know if this is answerable or not, but with this whole conversation, we've kind of been pairing, you know, horsemanship against dogmanship.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the correct term or not, because I personally, I don't have much dog experience. And, you know, I'm excited now after talking with Jack and now talking with you. And we've had other friends who have dogs, and at some point I do want to get a good dog. But one of the things with horsemanship is early on, when you know, you can grow up with horses or get into this either way. When you decide to become a horseman and be able to ride your own horse and teach him, progress him, learn together, grow, and do something productive. You know, when you start on that journey, horsemanship takes feel and it takes skills. But sometimes in the beginning, I think a horseman needs to really buckle down and learn some fundamental basics
Uh-huh.
and start to learn feel at the same time. But they can't just go off the deep end, just feeling and just hoping that things will happen or just being nice to their horse. They really have to understand some fundamental basics, like
Yeah.
biomechanically, and even like some mental basics. And they have to learn to be in the right place, and then they can practice that stuff. You can, you know, be a one-legged guy, and you can still get out there and practice that, figure out how to do it, and then you'll get some results, and you can be building your field at the same time. With dogs, and Joe had kind of asked you a similar question as far as, you know, just what it takes to feel to a dog, because you don't have that extra sense touch, which we have with a horse.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is more important for somebody starting out? Is it that they really dive into the feeling side and try to feel how the dog is and what he's thinking and how his feel matches their feel, or are there some fundamental things that you can teach somebody that they can just go out there and start practicing, and then their feel can come, as they practice those kind of set in stone things you can teach them?
That's a tough one, because feel for me is you've got to be able to read the sheep to help that dog feel, to get the dog on the right feel, because that's where the feel is coming through, is the sheep. So to, that's probably why I do start most of my clinics with, you're going to hear a lot about reading sheep. I'm going to try to point out this whole time, okay, look at what the sheep are doing there. That's why your dog's doing this. Or if your dog would just get this much further off of those sheep, the sheep would quit running. The reason the sheep are running is because your dog's in the pressure point. He's not back controlling the pressure point with feel. He's in it, and basically what you're saying to those sheep is you've left a gate open, and they're going to continue to try to run out it until you get your dog further back off to where you basically have closed that gate. And that's all through developing that feel. So if someone, to me, you can tell when people have kind of a stock sense and kind of a feel, even if it's, they don't have a ton of confidence there yet. You can see it coming. You can see that they're understanding, oh, that I see it now. I see, you can see it through their timing. Maybe their dog and themselves aren't together enough yet for that to fully develop, but you can see the person can see it. Where it's really hard for some people is when they just don't see it on the sheep. They don't. To them, it's just they're just physically moving. They don't see like how to finesse that move, and how to get those sheep to possibly just turn, or, like I'll say to people, put your dog away and just come out here without a dog. I just want to see, just move these sheep, don't chase them, move them a proper way, and because a person doesn't have a dog, they usually have to have them up along a fence, and I'll say, so come out here and show me how much or how little does it take to get these sheep to start moving forward and then get them to stop. How much pressure from you does it take? How much or how little? And see what kind of reaction you get from the sheep. And so I try to break it down to where they have no choice. They have to be watching and reading the sheep. And I've changed my terminology. You said early on that you kind of evolve as a teacher or a clinician. The more you do it, the more that you kind of evolve. I've started to change my terminology there, because I used to always just say, watch the sheep. Well, you can watch sheep all day long, but if you're not reading and not reading intent, you're not going to be able to communicate to your dog the right way. Again, your timing's going to be off. So a lot of it is you got to just read what they're thinking, and yes, they do think, Joe.
Like I said, I want to be a believer. I'm just uneducated. That's all.
Yeah,
But
sheep are really popular right now, Joe. It's it's a lot easier than cattle in this economy. It's son of a buck. Hold on, guys. Sorry about that. So can you hear that when the phone announces the caller and all that?
Yeah.
Okay. You know what? I'd be tempted to leave that in the podcast just so she feels guilty.
You could just put your phone on Do Not Disturb.
Hey, I thought I did that earlier, but I think I took it off so that I could answer your call. It's not your fault, though. It's I take full responsibility for me and my phone in the field that I'm lacking.
Fair enough. Yeah, well, that is the whole thing, right? Is, if you don't grow up around it, and it sounds like you kind of grew up around animals, and then obviously we're in the perfect situation to learn this skill set. It can take a while just to understand, like, how, in this case, how a flock moves, how a herd moves, like what does it mean when they turn their head, right?
Uh-huh.
Way before it translates down to the feet.
Yes.
I see that with people I teach. Every now and then we'll get people that they want to learn the horsemanship, but it's like a big kind of feather in their cap. Like, I want to get this horse around cattle. I want my horse around cattle, And so I was like, okay, we'll get the horse. I mean, I'm at a point now. It's like, well, I mean, get them around cows. Don't get them around cows. Like, if you have everything else kind of lined up, that all falls into place. But yeah, we'll get them around cows. And I just said, all right, go there to the hip of that one, do this and do that. And you just watch and you're like, oh man, like this person has like anytime you approach a cow, you might as well just be in like pulling the lever on a slot machine. Like, they have no idea what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And it just takes a while to develop that feel. So I think that's actually a pretty cool. I'm sure it might test your patience as a clinician sometimes, but it's pretty cool that you're like, well, slow things down, and I want you to move the sheep.
Yeah. And because they want to work their dog, which I understand. I mean, I get that. A lot of times people, they're resistant to do it, but I still do it at home sometimes. I mean, if I don't have a dog available, which I pretty much always have a dog available, but if I'm like, well, all I got to do is if I just open the gate and if I've got 60 yearlings in here and I want to keep 5 in, I know they want to go out the gate. All I got to do is stand back and then move forward when I want my 5 to stop, and they're going to stop because because they've been treated right with dogs. They're not afraid. They don't panic. And when I move in, sometimes all I got to do is lean and they're going to stop because they know that when I make that lean, that is saying to them, stop. And I mean, they can be yards away from me and they'll stop, because they're not afraid not to. The Jack and I treat our sheep exactly the same. The dogs are trained pretty much the same. The sheep know that they can trust us and they can trust the dogs. They know that we're going to get there if a dog is being bad. And so they're never panicking. They're always thinking, so we go to a lot of clinics where, a lot of times I'll be like, well, we've got to try to break these sheep first. The sheep are so panic stricken that we've got to get them settled and thinking and quiet. And usually by the end, if it's a 3-day clinic, usually by the midday of the second day, the sheep have already changed because we're getting dogs pushed off of them, getting them back in a better position to where they're not in the pressure point. And the sheep, I say to people all the time, sheep don't want to just run all the time. They would prefer to walk, trot maybe, but not full tilt run. That is not their normal, that is not how they want to be. If I look out my window and my sheep are running at a full tilt, I'm running and grabbing a jacket and some shoes because something is going on. That's just not how they are. So, I mean, you can retrain them to not run if you treat them right.
Yeah, because like cattle, we were talking about that earlier in the difference between them and sheep. And it seems to me like, I'm sure there's a lot more differences, but the cattle just get to that frightful paranoid point later. They can, take more pressure, but we have a pretty nice herd of cattle here, probably somewhat like your sheep, where they're just used to the place and it really doesn't take much to work the cows. And we do an internship program here. And sometimes the most teachable moment is, maybe around weaning time, or sometimes in early calving season where the calves are just not real hooked onto their mamas yet. We'll be moving the cows, and maybe we have some new people that haven't done that yet, and somehow things start getting sideways, and the cattle start getting to that point where they're confused, they're worried about their baby, they're just not they're not dealing with us anymore. And so you'll just say, all right, stop guys, we're done. And they look at you like you're crazy, because in their mind, they think we need to call the neighbors. We need more people. Like
Yeah.
we need more help. This is getting worse. And they
Yeah.
don't, but that was that point where the cows are no longer listening to us.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing to do. I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing left to do. We just need to go sit over there for 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, and then we'll come back. We'll do this again. And it'll be a piece of cake. But,
Yeah.
And that's something, and I'm learning something listening to you about working with people, because that is a tricky thing, is knowing how someone's going to learn that, or at least start to feel that. And sometimes I feel like the only way is a lot of failure, where, maybe a guy is just always in the wrong spot. So maybe on a day where it doesn't matter as much, you just put him in a hard spot, and you just, under no uncertain terms, don't let that cow get by you, or don't let cows go between us. And they're going to start missing a few, but you say, hey, figure it out. Just, you need to feel where to be, but you just don't let them get through, because no amount of explaining, the shoulder or the pressure points, or, easing off, like it's just not working. And you finally just say, hey, this is your spot. Don't let cows pass at all.
Yeah.
And they'll still do a bad job, but at the end of the day, they might finally start anticipating something before it happens. And I always think of it, and I'll tell the guys, you got to look at what we're doing here. And just because you're not in charge doesn't mean you shouldn't pay attention to everything and see this project, from a bird's eye view. Like, know where you are, and know where your horse is, but know where I am, and know where that guy is, and know where the cows are. Know the gate we're going through. Know the next gate we're going through after that. Know where we're going in the end. Keep all that in your mind. Think about that the whole time. And it's that to me can be difficult. Trying to help somebody. Sometimes you're not even trying to teach them a lot. You're just trying to get through the day, and it's a little selfish. You're just trying to get them to help you not have a bad day, and that can be very tricky. Trying to get them to be in the right place at the right time, when you can tell that they don't have any experience with feeling back from the herd. They might ride their horse great, probably like somebody who can control a dog great, but they're not paying attention to the herd. And maybe they're paying attention to that one cow in front of them. They might be doing a great job with that one cow, but a herd of 200 cows is not one cow. And so it doesn't matter where that one cow is. It matters where all the other cows are. Yeah. And I struggle with that, just, or I don't know if I struggle. I think I'm doing all right, but I'm constantly thinking about that, constantly trying to get better at just, it's like a mixture of like pushing people into that scenario, but also giving them enough information and not confusing them too much either.
Yes.
And that's, that boy, to me, that's where I really admire good teachers who can just hang in there and keep watching for little things, and then putting the right information. Because I can tend to be kind of a hammer and just be like, look, this is how I think about it. Like, how can you not get that through your head? But maybe they just won't get that through. Maybe they're like the cows, It takes more feel there too.
Yeah. Well, and they're only ready to take in what they're ready to take in. So I've had people that have started coming to my clinics that are now friends, that they come, like they'll come here for lessons, or they come to maybe 3-4 clinics a year. And, I maybe said the same thing at the clinic 2 years ago, because I do tend to, I do find that I do repeat myself a lot, which you do. I mean, it's the nature of the industry. You're going to repeat yourself a lot. And they'll say, oh my God, I can't believe you've been saying that all these years. I just got it. I get it now. I get it. And I'm like, yeah, I could see it was coming, but you weren't quite, I mean, it was nearly there, but you weren't quite there yet. And so when they get to a certain place, because I constantly am saying to them, you're watching your dog, you're watching your dog, you're watching your dog. I can tell you're watching your dog. because your timing is off. You're watching your dog, you got to get your eyes on those sheep, and so once someone has gotten to a place where I can tell that they're watching their sheep, but they're not really reading their sheep, I'll say to them, I don't say it to everybody, but I'll say, okay, I want you laser focus on those sheep and just work your dog accordingly. You're going to see your dog through the sheep, but your eyes are going to stay on those sheep. Do not look at your dog. And, for some of them, that's the huge light bulb, because I've basically said, you can work these, your dog will work so much better for you if you will just get your timing right on the sheep, because he's going to trust you so much more, because all of the information that you're giving him is accurate and it's fair. And when you go to correct, it's a fair correction, because yeah, he's messed up a little bit. He's maybe pushed in too hard or whatever, but you're correcting him in the spot that makes sense to him. So because your timing's right, because you're watching your sheep. So I had a small clinic here. It's been a couple of months ago now, and we had a little bit of time, and people were talking about shedding, sorting sheep and everything. And we had 5 or 6 of the yearlings in the round pen, and there happened to be a black one in there. And so which the North Country Cheviots are all white, but I like the ones, we sometimes get black ones, or we get what we call badger faces, where they're just marked kind of like a paint horse. They're black with white markings and all that. I like those because they're just a little different. Jack, on the other hand, can't stand them, but I like them. So if they're ewe lambs, I keep them. And so if it's a good one. And so there was a black one, and there was like maybe 6 or 8 yearlings in there. And I said, since we have time, I want each of you to go in here, and I just want you to get that black lamb to the back of this group and see how much or how little it takes for you to just, she's standing at the front. I want her to come around to the back of the group. Then the rest of them all, still pointing the same way. And so they started doing it, and there was some of them could do it pretty easily, and others really just were putting too much pressure on, and almost made her to where she didn't want to move, because she was being too focused on. So she got worried, and she'd go in the middle of the group instead of saying, oh, you want me to the back? I'll just walk around the rest of these sheep and stand at the back. And so it evolved from that into saying, okay, now I want you just to keep her and bring 2 others with her, and we're just going to separate this group. And my one friend, who's been at it for a while, she was doing a pretty good job of it, but she had one group kind of out in the front. She was holding the group that had the black lamb in it, and she was trying to get another lamb to leave that group to go with the group that she was letting go. Well, instead of letting that lamb, she was almost trying to force it to take a different path to get there. And I'm watching that lamb, and I could tell the lamb wanted to go where she was trying to get it to go. It just couldn't go the way she wanted it to, because she was actually pushing it up towards where the rest of us were standing, watching. And it just didn't want to come past us. And so I let her try it for a bit, and she could keep it out from the others, but she could not get it to go. So finally I just said, hey, just take a step back, let her come back to you, and she's going to walk right past you and walk over to that other group that you've got separated over there. And she's like, no, she won't. And I said, just try it. Just trust me. And so she stepped back, and that lamb just, as soon as she took the pressure off, the lamb walked right back to the little group that she had, and then walked right past him and went over to the group that, she's like, how did you know that? I said, because she's been looking at that group the whole time. She just couldn't come past us. There's too much pressure up here, and that's what I'm trying to explain about reading intent. That lamb to me was like screaming, I want to go there. I just can't go there this way, so It's that kind of stuff. But,
So this might be
I know we already talked about this, but this might be a dumb question. um, with these dogs, like we were talking about Scott, your first dog,
Uh-huh.
right? Yeah. So you mentioned he kind of had a little slower demeanor in how he went about things. Is that something you kind of like? I assume each dog has a different feel, but when you're talking about, feeling pressure and like looking at things in terms of energy and how that's affecting other beings around you, are there some dogs that are like they're like an atomic bomb when they start, where it's like just like them looking at the sheep just
Yeah.
kind of makes them
Yeah.
like on edge, and then other dogs that maybe don't have that same kind of presence? And if so, you don't have to go into too much detail, but that seems like something that it would be hard to kind of control
Mm-hmm.
initially, because that's just like, I mean, it's like people. Like you can feel when some people walk into a room,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, sometimes people, they like, you can actually talk to them and talk to them about dialing down the vibrato that they have or whatever it is, but like that seems like it would be very hard to communicate with a dog. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because that it seems like that would take a lot of feel, and I think maybe just being around animals and dogs and horses and stuff, I think I could feel that, but I would have no idea how to go about changing that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So the biggest thing with that is, is going to be the distance. So getting your
Yeah.
dog back at a better distance. So a dog that's really like just gangbusters and, just full on comes in there, just, Mach 10 with their hair on fire. You got to get the distance right. So, people tend to do with a dog like that is, again, they'll stand in the sheep themselves and force the dog out. Most times with a dog like that, it makes them fight harder. They do everything they can to get by you and get to those sheep. I still give them their sheep, but they also are still going to get corrected for being too tight. And you just keep putting pressure on where they're wrong. And pretty soon, when they start to yield to that, then their distance comes right, and that in itself will help settle them because they know they've got control of their stock. So once they're back off and they're in a position where they're like, oh, well, here it is. I've got full control of the stock back here. A lot of times that hard going dog will start to settle down because he knows he's got a stock. He knows he's got a sheep. But, in that also comes respect. So sometimes I'm not going to get it immediately because I've got to start to gain and earn that respect from the dog. They're going to try to beat by me and everything. But generally, as soon as they understand, they're going to get corrected for the wrong behaviors, but the correct behaviors, they get all the freedom in the world. And so, I always try to just make it so they make a better decision. I'm like, look, that what you did right there, that's going to get corrected, but there's your sheep again. Make a better choice, make a better decision. If you don't, the consequence is coming again. There's always going to be a consequence to your wrong behavior and the freedom to the correct behavior. And the dogs figure it out really quickly, because they seek structure and they seek respect. They may look like they're having fun running amok trying to kill a sheep, but actually they'd rather have that structure and have respect. They're always seeking a leader.
So, when you're in a competition, is there any sort of metric or positive or negative judging associated with how far away your dog's handling the sheep from, or is it just how the sheep handle?
It's so if they're too far off, they have to be on the right contact. So if they're too far off the sheep will show you that.
Sure.
Especially if you get to the competitions like that aren't just on completely what we call dog broke sheep. if sheep have been run and run and run and run in this same competition, those sheep get to a point where they're just basically, you point them at a gate and they're going to run through it. It's different than the sheep like from out west. If you go out west to the range sheep, they're used to running in bands of 3,000 to 5,000, and then they pull them out of there and they plug 5 out there for you, and that's a whole different animal. So you get on those sheep, and the dog's contact's got to be right, or the sheep won't be. They'll show you that. So you don't that it has to be the right distance. If it's too far off, it's no good either. So
that makes sense. Yeah. Well, like I said, I can see how this can develop into a craft and an art, like the deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole you go. Obviously, you travel the country doing clinics for it, but yeah, there's a lot of that I think is really interesting, because like I said before, but then because you're lacking that extra sense, your ability to feel energy has to be almost that much better.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's awesome. And I could see where someone could spend a lifetime developing that in themselves, and then spend a couple more lifetimes trying to figure out how to teach that to people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, to me, it's a never ending learning process. Every lambing, I learned something more about sheep. I mean, and I've been lambing sheep for a long time now. And each lambing, they will show me something, and I'm like, oh my God, that's just amazing. Or the dogs will show me something at lambing and I keep referring to lambing because that is the most intense time on the farm. And especially the way that we do it, we pasture lambs, so they're out in the pasture, and it's just a lot of very hands-on work. And the dogs get a lot of work, but they also, it takes a specific dog for me to use.
Sure.
They have to be at a certain level of training to be able to do it. And, there's just so many things in it that like I say, to me, it's just a never ending learning process. I've got a dog right now that he's actually in for training, and he was a bit of a tough nut. I mean, the reason I have him is because his owner really was struggling with him. And I was working him the other day, and his pace is wrong, what we call pace. I've got his distance right now, but then when he turns on sheep to walk in, he wants to trot in, which of course, as soon as he makes contact, he's going to flush the sheep. Well, I've tried stopping him. I've tried correcting him. I've tried a bunch of stuff, and the dog just can't figure out, okay, I just need to walk here. I use the sheep as much as I can, and when I say that, what I mean is I put the sheep in a pressure point so that they are putting weight back on that dog. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. When I say,
I think I'm tracking.
So they're not freely already moving towards me. They're actually wanting to go away from me, even though they're pointed at me, if that makes sense. So the where they want to be is behind them. And so I use that with a dog like that to try to get him to feel, okay, you're rapidly approaching that point of control. If you don't draw back a little bit, these sheep could actually figure out how to run around you, because you're going to be right in the middle of them. So I was watching him yesterday, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to quit correcting you for this. I'm not going to tell you to lie down. I'm just going to watch you and see what you do. And he would trot up to the spot where he was going to affect the sheep, and he'd stop himself. And I'm like, huh, okay, well, I guess we'll just do that. So he figured out, even though, his approach looks all wrong, but actually when he gets there, he goes, ooh, I better stop, or I'm going to fleshy sheep. So he's figured it out. He's just figured out how it works for him. I can't make him. I feel like by now, seeing what I see, by my being less with him, he's going to figure his pace out more and more and more himself, because he's figuring that piece out. He's figuring out, oh, here it is right here. I better stop. And that's him thinking himself and getting it. So there I learned something.
Yeah. Maybe one day there won't be like a rush to get to that spot.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool observation. Sometimes I think same with people, right? If you set up the situation, but you have to give them the room, like Joe said earlier, to learn to be themselves, not to be the carbon copy of the last dog you trained. But, it might take a little while for some of us, but we learn to grow into, how we're going to do it. We have to find that point where we have to stop. But then, we might have our own little style. Jack talked about that too, about dogs. You watch their style. I thought that was cool, that every dog has a style. I never would have thought of that, but I'd never really thought about dogs much. So maybe I would have if I had a dog, but that's so cool, because that's the same thing with horses. You'll get different horses in, and they all have kind of a style, but they all, that's that less is more thing. None of them, well, let's put it this way, like no horse is suicidal. And for the most part, like all horses are trying to do a good job, but they might go about it in a different way, barring some really exceptional troubled horses. So many times you get in their way trying to make them exactly like the last horse you worked with. Whereas, this next horse might show you something kind of cool in his own style and still get the same job done.
Yeah.
And it's just such a, that's really something, just you have to work on with yourself, I guess. But
well, and he's going to enjoy it so much more because he's not getting in trouble for something that he doesn't understand what he's getting in trouble for. He's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here, and so by him figuring that piece out himself, it's like, well, as long as as far as I'm concerned, as long as he's not upsetting the sheep, if that's his approach and that's how he needs to approach, then that's his approach. The hard part's going to be getting the owner to understand that, yes, he looks like he's coming forward rapidly, but you yelling lie down 15 times isn't going to change that. So it's getting that piece to be understood.
That could be like podcast number 2, just talking about owners, because that tracks with me too, what you just said, because sometimes you will have a horse like that and you might have them for a month before you start to come up with a good plan for how you're going to help them. But then that's only in your head and in that horse. And, the owner might say, all right, it's looking good. I want to take him home. and that's like a can of worms trying to be like, he looks like he's doing good, but if you took him home, he would buck you off. And let me tell you why. And that answer doesn't always go over very well, because you're like, because I'm doing this, this, and this, and I'm kind of letting him be comfortable here. And he's going to eventually really grow into this confident horse, and that problem will be gone. But if you go home and you just swing on and go run barrels, he's going to buck you off, that's really tricky, but that could be like a whole other podcast.
It's I used to take dogs in for training a long time ago, and I quit doing it for the public because they really didn't understand this method. And so they would come here with the expectation of, they wanted to see a stop, the dog better lie down when it was told, and a left and a right. And, it might take me a month just to get the dog to do a proper, what we call an outrun, a proper go out around the sheep in a proper manner, not to disturb the sheep, but enough to control them and all of that. And all they'd see was that he maybe didn't stop 3 times when I told him to.
Mm.
And, I just was like, well, there's just no point. But I feel like there's enough understanding of this type of method now that people are saying, well, okay, I think I get that. I think I understand that this isn't about, because for me, that's just obedience. That's obedience on sheep. The lie down and yes, it's very useful. You need to stop. I don't mean that. But it shouldn't be your only point of control of your dog, is that you can get it to stop. If that's your only point of control of your dog, you're going to be in trouble. So, getting them to understand, look, the more with this method in particular, I feel like you really do have to learn to read the stock, because if you don't, you're going to struggle big time. You're not going to be able to help your dog at all. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm with Ben. We could go through go do a whole nother podcast on the well, now we just got to make other people understand this stuff.
Yeah. Because what you just said got a bunch of wheels turning in my head, and then I was like, I gotta shut up now.
Yeah, I thought about horses
We're at that point.
rode today, and the text I get about, well, is he doing this? Is he doing that? I'm like, how about we start with not having his head flip upside down every time we touch the reins.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. I started thinking about the conversation I want to have. One of my clients has this horse that's kind of really bothered, and they don't ride a ton, but he's a home builder, and he's a good home builder. And I was going to tell him that, all the steps that you take when you're building a house, and you might not look like you're building a roof, but when you're putting in that foundation, it's going to correlate to having that straight roof line that's not going to sink in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's why your horse isn't doing all the things that maybe you'd like to see yet, because we're still doing the foundation part. There's some rocky stuff, so, but I always think about that kind of stuff, because I don't want to get on the phone and be like, well, I'll call you back in a few weeks and hopefully we're further along. But, I'm excited about it, and I want them to be excited about it. So I want to tell them what I'm doing. But then sometimes they wouldn't understand. So it's cool when people have different careers. You can say, hey, what you do at work, I'm kind of doing that with your horse, because, this isn't, again, it's not just this meat on sticks that we're pushing around, but it's, but it thinks, and it's, it needs all the layers of preparation, just like what you do every day. So, it's such a fun thing to talk about.
Yeah. It's the same with the foundation is just, to me, it's key in the dogs, and it certainly sounds like it's key with the horses as well. And if you get that good solid foundation, I know Jack said on his podcast, and it's the same for me. There's times I don't see dogs for months. They'll come to a clinic maybe in April, and then they'll come to one in October or whatever. And that dog will remember, because to me, it's because the foundation was solid, and it takes very little to get that piece back from that dog. It's like they almost immediately go, oh, yep, got it. They just, because again, I feel like it's because they're given a chance to think. We're trying to help them think all the time. That's one thing I do say at my clinics a lot, is we breed them to think, and then we treat them like they can't. And they absolutely can think if we just give them that chance, but you can shut their minds off just the same as with the horses, through force and through a lot of different things that dogs go through. So, it used to be when I did clinics, I didn't realize, but I was actually working on just physically changing the dog. And then the more that I've done them, I'm like, yeah, no, you gotta get their mind first. Once I get them thinking right, the rest of it comes easy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think those are words of wisdom to end on tonight. That's this has been a really enjoyable conversation, Kathy, because that's kind of like the whole point of this is we get to talk to people who are really good at their craft and very actively pursuing it, and it's very obvious that you're one of those people. And like we've been talking about this whole time, like the parallels with dogs and horses and
Yeah.
getting them to think, and well, now how do we get the people to get along with them? Like
Yeah.
like we said before, it's just never ending
Yeah.
because you're never gonna perfect it. But it's been really fun getting to talk with you about it, and we appreciate you and Jack a couple weeks ago making time to talk with us, because it's been really fun getting to know y'all.
Well, it's really enjoyable doing it and getting to know you guys better. And yeah. So Jack talked to someone who knows you, Joe. He does a clinic for a gal at Lexington. She's a vet, actually, Nellie Beerley.
Okay.
Yeah. She said she's known you and your family for years.
Yeah, she's a family friend. I didn't. That's cool. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he goes out there twice a year to Nellie's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now I got to get out there and see him, because I would like to get to one of those clinics. I might never be worth a damn with a dog. I'm probably gonna, I'm one of those people that thinks sheep are stupid and ask all kinds of questions. But I think I have fun either way.
I won't hold it against you, I promise.
Yeah.
That's
thanks
cool.
so much, Kathy. I definitely learned a few things listening to you tonight, so I appreciate
you're really,
it as well.
very welcome.
Yeah.
And good to meet you on here.
Well, we're going to stop recording, but don't hang up just yet.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.